I've been advised to give a statement every time we're going to cover this case, and it'll be very brief. YouTube allows educational content, and this could also include graphic content or things of that nature that could describe certain situations. Reading a court transcript falls under that because it's educational content, and I will be providing context to this educational content. There are no images other than photos of the attorneys involved in the case, but nothing else further. Describing what is happening in court is only to educate about this case. This is week 2, day 2, part 2 of May 13, 2025 of Cassie Ventura's testimony. The thumbnail for the first part looks something like this. I'm going to post it up. So let's continue reading this and concluding this day of testimony from Cassie Ventura. The attorneys have a sidebar. The court, Ms. Johnson, maybe you can help us with where we're going right now. I think the objection is grounded in lack of relevance and also the cumulative nature of the questioning. Am I right about that? Mrs. Stavio for the defense. That's right. The court says, maybe if you can give us some guidance as to where we're going next, that will be helpful. Ms. Johnson, for the government. Yes, Your Honor. We're going to go through the various supplies that were used because those are supplies that were demanded by the defendant, that were at every freak-off, that were consistent, which shows a pattern, which showed how he would control the events that happened at these freak-offs. I will not ask any more oil questions. I have one question on lubricant, but I'm going to march through the different supplies that were present. The court speaks. That's fine. I understood the objection to mainly be on the cumulative nature on this. I think we had about 20 questions on baby oil issues, and I think we can condense that a little more. You'll avoid the objection. Is that fair? That's fair, says Ms. Estevio for the defense. Mr. Agnifilo, the court speaks. Mr. Agnifilo speaks. I was going to say slippery slope, but I'm not going to say it. The court, Ms. Johnson, you may proceed. Thank you, Your Honor. Back to cross-examination of Cassie Ventura on this. When we are just talking about Astro, how was the slide used at freak-offs? As with respects to these supplies, baby oil or Astro, were there times when you ran out of them? Yes. What would happen when you ran out? We would run out. We would have to either call somebody, staff, to bring it, or ask the bell desk and give them a tip. When you say staff, whose staff are you talking about? Sean's staff. Which members of Sean's staff would resupply the hotel rooms? Assistants usually. Who would call those staff members? Sean would advise me to, or he would call himself. And you also mentioned calling the bell desk. Who would call the bell desk? Again, either me or him. If you called, at whose direction would you be calling? Sean's. Initially, what kind of lighting was used for the freak-offs? Initially, it was candlelit, so various candles. Who decided what kind of lighting would be used? Sean. What type of candles were used? At a time, really strong smelling candles like Glade or Dip Tea. Anything just really strong smelling. And who would typically bring the candles to the freak-offs? It was all part of the setup, so whether it was an assistant or me or him. Approximately how many candles were used? Approximately 6 to 10. How were the candles placed in the room? They were placed so that Sean could see me and the court in the candlelight. Who requested the candle setup? Sean. Besides lighting, were there any other uses of candle wax at freak-offs? A couple of times when it was poured on the body, but it wasn't common. When you say poured on the body, whose body was it poured on? My own or Sean's? And whose decision was it to pour wax on either your body or Sean's body? Sean. Did the lighting that was used in the freak-offs change over time? Yes. There were lights after a certain point, like the lights that we would use in the studio. Can you describe what the light you would use in the studio is? There are these multicolor lights that change with the music, kind of like a club light. What colors are those lights? Red, green, blue, purple? Who made the decision to change the lighting? Sean would have assistants bring the lights, so I guess him. Miss Gavin, can you please pull exhibits? Miss Ventura, do you recognize who's in this photograph? Yes. And what type of location is this photograph taken? To me, it looks like a hotel. It looks like the London Hotel in New York. Who took this photograph? I believe I did. Is this a true and accurate photograph of Sean? Yes. The government offers exhibits 3Q-1118. No objection from the defense. It will be admitted by the court. The government continues questioning. Miss Gavin, can you please publish government's exhibits? Miss Ventura, directing your attention to Sean's hand. What is he holding? He's holding cash. How do you describe the color of the room? It's red from the studio light. Is the studio lighting you described earlier responsible for that red color? Yeah. You could put that down, Miss Gavin. What temperature were the rooms where the freak-offs were held? They were usually pretty warm. Who set the temperature? Sean. And you described that the candles were strong. How did the room smell during the freak-offs? I mean, if it were a Glade candle and a bunch of them, angel whispers, if anybody knows what that smells like, just on 10, like it was super pungent and strong mixed with oil and just all of the other scents. What other scents were there? I mean, it was warm, so body odor, After a freak off, can you describe the condition of the room where the freak offs was held? The room was usually pretty bad off. Like there was oil all over the walls, the door handles, the bed, the sheets. We would often get to the room and I would need to call and ask for extra linen, towels, and stuff like that to try to mitigate those problems. But oil, candle wax all over the place. You mentioned you would call for extra linens. When would you do that? Prior to starting? Why would you call for extra linens? To cover up the furniture that was there, to try to protect it? You described wax and oil damage. What else, if anything, was soiling the linens? Sometimes blood, urine. So starting with blood, how would blood get on the linens at freak-offs? I was expected to have freak-offs. Who expected you to do freak-offs on your Sean? No, I don't think anybody really wants to do that. And you also mentioned urine. Yes. How would urine get on the linens at freak-offs? Sometimes Sean would he would have the on me. Sometimes there was so much going on. I don't know how they got soiled the way they did, to be completely honest. So focusing on the urine, did you want an escort or Sean to? No. So it looks like Estevallo has an objection, and then she follows with ask and answer. The government, Your Honor, I did not ask the question before. The court says, hold on. What is the objection? Ask and answer, says the defense. It's overruled. Ms. Ventura, did you want Sean or an escort to? No. And before that happened, what, if anything, did you discuss about being your? There was no conversation. It was just a turn on for him. So it happened. Who directed an escort to on you? Sean, can you please describe how it felt when this happened? I mean, just as humiliating. If anybody were there to see it, it was disgusting. It was too much. It was overwhelming. I choked. There couldn't have been anything on my face that was reading that I wanted to do that. I was kind of like, I was kind of just laid on the floor in a position I couldn't easily get out of. So, well, were you able to stop? I just kind of put my hands up, and eventually Sean saw and he told them to stop. Why did you put your hands up? Nothing I could really do laying on the floor. You mentioned choking. Why were you choking? Too much urine. And besides urinating, who else, if anyone, did that? Sean. Did you want Sean to urinate? I don't want anybody to urinate. And when in relation to the escort on you, did Sean on you at the same time? Approximately how many times did this happen? Throughout the relationship? Yes. Not super often, but often enough. Before leaving the hotel, what, if anything, did you do to clean up the linens you described? I mean, there wasn't really too much you could do but give a good tip and hope that they would help out. I would just try to clean up what I could. Usually like an assistant or a staff or somebody would come, I believe, after. Are you aware of hotels charge for damages to the rooms? I am. How did you know? Through conversations with the staff that got the call from the hotel. I remember specifically hearing a number that was crazy. It was having to redecorate the room. It was a really high number to fix it. Are you aware which hotel charged that really high number? That was the Intercontinental in New York. One more question for you about the urination. Why didn't you say no when this happened? Objection from the defense, Estevao. Mischaracterizations. Objection. The court. Miss Johnson, there's probably a couple more questions to ask. Miss Ventura, I believe you testified earlier about that it just happened and there wasn't any discussion. Is that an accurate summary of your statement? Yes. And when it happened, without any discussion, what did you do? I mean, I was just squeamish immediately and high and in the moment with this man. So that's what happened. When you say you were high and in the moment, what do you mean by that? There's not a whole lot of control you have at that point of taking that many drugs, being laid on the floor with two men standing over on you. Could have gotten up and screamed, I guess. Why didn't you say no when that happened? I thought it was obvious that I didn't want to do it, I guess. Do you remember the person that I referred to you as the first escort? Yeah. Were there other escorts that you used besides the first escort? Yes. And after this first escort, who typically found escorts for free cops? I was put on the task to find the escorts. And who, if anyone, put you on that task? Sean did. What, if any, requirements, physical or otherwise, did Sean have for escorts? At first, it was very specific that he wanted a black male with a large area. But eventually, it was just kind of became whatever's available. Where did you find escorts to hire? When it became really consistent, we had found an escort service called Cowboys for Angels, and they have escorts in like all major cities in the U.S. Before Cowboys for Angels, how did you find escorts? Initially Craigslist or Backpage or whatever. What is Craigslist? Craigslist is a website where you can put up ads and sell your bed and other things. It's just where you can place ads. Besides placing ads, can you also respond to ads? You can also respond to ads. Did you post any ads to Craigslist? No. Did you respond to ads? I did. At whose direction did you respond to ads? At Sean's direction. He'd tell me what to look for. Your Honor, I'm not sure when the court was planning to take a break this afternoon. I was planning to do so at 3, but if this is a good place, we can take it now. I think this would be a good place. So the jury's dismissed for a break. Now, the jury's not present. The court is asking, anything to raise before we take our break? Ms. Johnson says, nothing, Your Honor, thank you. Anything for the defense? No, Your Honor. We'll be back at 3, so there's a recess. So then we're back from break, and of course they're asking for the witness. All right. The court allows Ms. Johnson for the government to proceed with questioning. Thank you, Your Honor. Ventura, before the break, you were talking about Craigslist. Do you remember that testimony? Yes. In what cities did you respond to ads on Craigslist? New York, I think, was the main. At whose direction did you respond to the ads on Craigslist? At Sean's directions. When you responded to ads on Craigslist, whose contact information did you use? I used my own. Did you use your own name? No. What name would you use? Jackie Starr. Would you use your own phone number? I would have to use my own phone number. Yep. You also mentioned Backpage. What is Backpage? Backpage is a similar thing to Craigslist ads. Did you respond to ads on Backpage as well? I did. At whose direction? Sean's. Also, before we broke, you testified about a company called Cowboys for Angels. Do you remember that testimony? Yes. Who typically communicated with Cowboys for Angels? I did. I communicated with a gentleman named Garen. Who, if anyone, directed you to communicate with Garen? Sean. And how did you typically communicate with Garen? Usually through text, occasionally a call. When you would reach out to Garen, how much notice would you give that you needed an escort? Usually it wasn't that much notice. It'd be like somebody today. What else, if anything, would you tell Garen during those communications? I'd tell him what city we're in because he would basically send escorts based off of the city you're in, time and location, all of that. Ms. Gavin, could you pull up for identification for the court? Government's exhibit. I'm sorry, Ms. Gavin. I mean B-326. I'm sorry that I misspoke. So exhibits are posted for the government. Questioning continues. Ms. Ventura, do you recognize the communication in a government's exhibit B-326? Yes. Who is it? It's a text thread with me and Garen. How do you recognize it? I have his name in there as Garen CB4A, which is Cowboys for Angels. Is this the text thread from one of the devices you gave to the government? Yes. Is this a true and accurate text thread between you and Garen? Yes. The government offers exhibits, no objection from the defense, and the exhibits are admitted into court. Ms. Gavin, please publish the exhibits for the jury. Ms. Ventura, you mentioned this already, but since the jury can now see it, the contact says Garen CB4A. What does CB4A stand for? The company Cowboys for Angels. You can go back to the message, Ms. Gavin. Thank you. Who are the participants in this chat? Garen and I. Directing your attention to the first gray bubble on the first page. What is the date of the first message? June 29, 2012. What does Garen say to you in that message? Okay, this is the guy. He's new and really an amazing guy. I had him come to Miami for his final interview to meet me, and he is ready to go. And then what are the next two messages that you receive? Photos. And then at that bottom, what does Garen tell you at the bottom of page 2? His name is Trent. Have him for 7 p.m. When you receive communications like this with photographs, what did you do with the photographs? I would usually show them to Sean and see if that person was interested for free call. If that person was not of interest, what happened? I would just tell Garen no. If he had anybody else, did Sean have to approve the escorts? I definitely had to show him, yeah. Okay, Ms. Gavin, please turn to pages 3 and 4. Ms. Ventura, directing your attention to the left page, starting at the top. I'll read the gray bubbles and you read the blue. So the first gray bubble has a photograph with a message of William, who you saw before, but he need to confirm with William soon so he can rearrange his plans. Okay, for Trent, let's do 8. Okay, sounds good. Send over that Addy when you can. 10 West End, not close to home yet, stuck in traffic. Can we push to 9 p.m.? Pausing you there. 10 West End in the previous message. Who lived at 10 West End? That was my apartment in New York. on 60th and West End. Is this sort of a short excerpt we read from the communication from you and Garen consistent with how you typically communicated with Garen about hiring an escort? Yes, it was very transactional. He also testified earlier about dancers or strippers were sometimes hired. Do you remember that testimony? Yes. Who reached out to hire a dancer or a stripper? I would be tasked to do that based off of seeing a website or something. Who tasked you with hiring a dancer or stripper? Sean. In what cities did you hire dancers or strippers? New York, Miami, Los Angeles? Do you recall any of the names of the dancers or stripper services that you used? I remember one was called like Latin Men, but I don't remember the exact name. And aside from Craigslist, Backpage, the stripping dancing services, and Garen, were there times you spoke directly with the escorts? Yes. Who had typically communicated with the escorts? I did. Who directed you to communicate with the escorts? Estevallo objects from the defense, objection. These types of questions are leading. I know that there have been a number of them. Ms. Johnson, for the government speaks. Your Honor, I'll rephrase. Okay. Who, if anyone, directed you to communicate with escorts? Objection. Same objection from Estevallo. It doesn't solve the problem. The government speaks. It's who, if anyone, Ms. Estevallo. And it assumes a fact, not in evidence, that there was direction. The court speaks. I think that's the objection here. Ms. Johnson, I think you need to ask a few questions before you get to that one. Okay, government continues with the questioning. What, if any, conversation would you have prior to communicating with an escort directly? Can you repeat the question? Sure. I'm sorry. You testified you would typically communicate directly with an escort. Do you remember that? Yes. Prior to communicating directly with an escort, what, if any, conversations would you have with Sean? It would usually just be like, are we going to have a free cough this afternoon? Like, very simple. Even though I had contacts, he had contacts as well, Sean. Okay, when you say contacts, what do you mean by that? Okay. He had Garen's contact. He had some of the escort's personal contact information as well. So he would reach out as well. How do you know that? Because he would tell me. Did you ever reach out to escorts independently? No. How would you typically communicate with escorts? Through text. When would you, for example, go through someone like Garen versus communicating directly with an escort? Occasionally, Garen would actually just offer, like, maybe you should grab his number so you can call him directly. There was that much communication going on. And when would that communication happen? Just before? Are you talking? I'm sorry. I don't think I understood. You testified that Sean would tell you to grab an escort's contact information. Is that right? Yes. When would Sean tell you that? Before they would leave after a session, usually. How would you save an escort's contact information in your phone? I used to just use the abbreviation word strip after their name, like Garen's was CB4A. If they came from that company, that's how I would put them in my phone. Were there ever abbreviations you'd use besides CB4A? Strip is the only one I can think of. You testified earlier that Sean also had Garen and another escort contacts. Is that right? Yes. Why did you contact escorts and Garen? Sean was a very busy person, but he would just ask me straight up if he was busy doing something, if I could do it. Whose idea was it for you to contact escorts? Yours or someone else's? It was always someone else's. When you say reaching out to an escort, what, if anything, would you say to the escort about what you were hiring that escort to do? It depended on like the situation, how they came in, but I usually would say that my husband is into something called voyeurism and he likes to watch me with another man. It was like a basic conversation that I had with most of the escorts. From there, I would get a feel if they were willing to do it or not. When did that conversation typically occur in the process? Before, when they would first get there, first arrive at a location? first arrived at the hotel or wherever we were. And circling back to one of your answers where you said that it was someone else's idea to contact escorts, who was that someone else? Sean. So when you would speak to the escorts when they arrived at the hotel and have the conversation you just described, who was typically present for that conversation? It would usually just be me and the escort. If Sean wanted to hear or overhear, he would listen from the other room. How would you know he could listen from the other room? Just the actual distance? It wasn't super far. Did you ever speak to Sean about him listening to the conversation? Yeah. He would tell me if he heard anything or not. What conversations, if any, did you have with Sean about what to say to the escorts at this initial meeting? I'm sorry, could you rephrase that? Sure. What what if anything did you discuss with Sean about what you would say at the individual meetings? Just Sean gave me direction. It was usually, like this is my husband's fantasy. We created the scenario that we were married and this is his fantasy and this is what I like to do for him to please him. So these were things that he would tell me to be able to say to the escorts or make them more comfortable in it, I guess. I don't. And those and are those the things that you would then say to the escorts? Yeah. After you had this initial conversation with the escort, what would you do after that conversation? I would usually go to the back into the room with Sean and just finish getting ready to go out and start the session. Would you tell Sean what the conversation with the escort was about? Yes. If it was something that we hadn't used before or somebody that still didn't know us, like we were like who we were, he would just have questions about it and just to inquire if it was a safe person. I felt comfortable with them if they were willing to do all the things that we had discussed. Were there occasions where you did not use the escort who came to meet you and with whom you had this little initial conversation? Yes. With one particular in mind, the person tried, but eventually just said they could not keep in, and so they were sent on. Who sent them on? Sean. And you mentioned something in your description of the conversation with Sean. If the escort was safe, what did you mean by safe? Safe that there was there was sometimes a conversation. This wasn't all the time where Sean wanted to clarify if the person was a cop. At first I didn't understand, and then I later learned why. Also that the person wasn't going to, just run and tell everybody about their experience with us. What did you learn about why what you just said? I'm sorry. You just said that sometimes Sean asked you to ask if a person was a cop, right? Yeah. And you said later I learned about why. Yeah. What did you learn? I learned this whole situation was not legal. Objection from the defense. Estevao objects. The court since sustained. The jury should disregard the witness's last answer. How were escorts typically paid? With cash, money? At what point during the session were they typically paid? At the end. Approximately how much were escorts typically paid? Anywhere from 1,500 to, I would say, 5,000, 6,000. What role, if any, did you have in determining how much escorts were paid? I didn't have a role. It wasn't my money. Who typically handed cash to the escorts? I often did, sometimes Sean. If you handed cash to escorts, where did you get the cash? It was handed to me by Sean. How did cash get to the location from the freak offs, if you know? It was brought by like security or somebody, or he brought it himself. When you say he brought it himself, who is he? Sean. When you were hiring, for example, a stripper or a dancer, were there ever times when you were required to pay a deposit in advance? Yes, especially with the dancer at a company. How did you pay that deposit? I would put that on my personal card. Approximately how much did those deposits cost when you hired a dancer? Anywhere from 165 to 200. For the escorts who you interacted with, what were they paid thousands of dollars to do? To finish. Is that after they finish, after having S, after a long session? And for all the dancers you interacted with at freak-offs, those were individuals paid as well? Yes. How much were those dancers paid when they came to freak-offs? Anywhere between the range that I just said before, 1,500 to 6,000 to 7,000. For all those dancers you interacted with, what were they paid? Those 1,500 to 6,000 to do, to entertain, and to also ultimately have. Generally, what gender who were hired for freak-offs? Male. Were there any exceptions? No. We did have a female one time, 1 or 2 times. Miss Ventura, there was a binder sitting next to you. Do you see the binder sitting next to you? Could you look through that binder at the photographs inside and let me know who you recognize those individuals to be? Would you like me to look at all? Yes, please. Have you looked at all of them? Yes. Who generally do you recognize the individuals depicted in those exhibits to be? Generally, they're escorts that we hired, but not everybody. Not everybody. Are some of them dancers? Some of them I don't recognize. We can go through them one by one. Do you want me to? You can leave that there. That's fine. Miss Gavin Johnson requests that Miss Gavin put exhibits up. Miss Ventura, we talked about this individual previously, right? Yes. We referred to him as the first escort. Is that right? Correct. Do you know his name? I don't. I can't remember it. You earlier testified about a freak-off with him in LA. Is that right? Yes. Are there any other cities in which you had freak-offs with this escort besides Los Angeles? Definitely Vegas, maybe New York, but not 100% sure, Miss Johnson. Request for exhibits to be taken down. Ms. Ventura, do you recognize the individuals depicted in 2A-612? Yeah. How do you know that individual? He was an escort that we called Dave. Is this a fair and accurate picture of Dave? Yes. Government offers exhibits and no objection from the defense. The court admits the exhibits. How did you hire Dave? Dave was actually through Craigslist or Backpage, one of the two. I don't remember specifically which one. And in what city did you use Dave? We used Dave in New York. He would fly to Miami and Los Angeles. When Dave would travel, who would arrange Dave's travel? Occasionally I did. He would. Dave would himself. I think a couple of times a travel agent from Sean's company. When you say he would, which he are you referring to? To Dave. Do you know Dave by any other name? His real name is Clayton. Do you know his real last name? Howard. Can you take that down, Miss Gavin? Okay. And pull up other exhibits are pulled up. Miss Ventura, do you recognize who's depicted in government's exhibit 2A-625? Yes. Who is that? That is Daniel. How do you know Daniel? Daniel was an escort that we hired in New York City at one point. Is this a fair and accurate picture of Daniel? Yes. Okay. The government offers exhibits, no objection from the defense. Exhibits are admitted and published for the jury. You mentioned you hired Daniel in New York. Is that right? Yes. And what service did you contact to hire Daniel? I believe it was a dancer service, but it's like vague. Ms. Johnson asked for exhibits to be taken down and other to be pulled up. Do you recognize who's depicted in government's exhibit 2A-630? Yes. Who's that? That's Jules. How do you recognize Jules? I was going to say worked with him for many years. But yeah, we had an encounter for a few years. When you say encounter, what do you mean by that? Freak-offs. For several, really. Is that a fair and accurate photo of Jules? Yes. The government offers some exhibits, no objection from the defense, and exhibits are admitted and published for the jury. Ms. Ventura, do you know Jules' last name? I don't. You mentioned that you had freak-offs with them for many years. In what cities did you have freak-offs with Jules? Los Angeles, New York, Miami, Las Vegas, all of them. How, if you know, did you hire Jules? I don't remember actually, no. Okay, we could take that down, and then Miss Gavin, and then more exhibits are published. More exhibits are pulled up. Ms. Ventura, do you recognize the individuals depicted in government's exhibit 2A-609? Yes. Who is that? I knew him as the Punisher. How did you know the Punisher? Used to have a few times for freak-offs. Is this a fair and accurate photograph of the Punisher? Yes. So government offers exhibits, no objection from the defense. Exhibits are published and displayed. Ms. Ventura, did you know the Punisher's real name? No. In what city was he used? I believe we originally hired him in New York. I don't know that he traveled. I don't think he did. Do you recall how he was hired? I believe he was hired through a dancing service in New York. Uh, More exhibits get pulled down and other exhibits are shown. Ms. Ventura, do you recognize who is depicted in government's exhibit 28-613? Yes. Who is that? I knew him or know him as Johnny. I don't know his last name. How do you know Johnny? He was an escort that we hired. Is this a fair and accurate photo of Johnny? Yes. The government offers exhibits, no objection, and exhibits are entered and published. In what city or cities did you hire Johnny? He was hired in Los Angeles, might have done some traveling in New York and Miami, but not 100%. How did you hire Johnny, if you remember? Johnny was through a service called Latin Men. Exhibits are taken down and questioning continues. Who were some of the most frequently used escorts? Most frequently used would be Jules, Dave, Johnny. I think those were the main ones. And we just looked at 6 photos of escorts. Are those all the escorts hired for freak-offs, or just some of them? Just some of them. And we talked about a travel a little bit with Dave. How, if you know, would travel be arranged for other escorts? For other escorts, I mean, we didn't have a whole lot of them travel, but there was one particular trip that we took to Ibiza, and one of the Garen's guys flew out there. So I think the travel was probably arranged by them. When, if ever, did you book escort travel? Occasionally. Like if we absolutely needed to, it wasn't all the time. Before booking any escort travel, what, if any, conversations would you have with Sean about booking travel? I mean, he would ask me like what we were doing, if we were flying somebody in, who's available, and from there talk about how to get them there if they weren't in town or they weren't in the city. What would he say about when you say he talked about how to get them there? What would he say? Do they need to fly in? Do they need travel, or are they here? Just basic questions. He also mentioned with respect to Dave that Sean's travel agent was sometimes involved. Do you remember that? Yeah. What, if any, role did you have in communicating with Sean's travel agent? I definitely reached out to his travel agent. I believe we just acted as if it was an new employee, or somebody that was being interviewed or something. When you say we acted, who are you referring to? Sean and I. And when you say acted as a new employee, who would you say was the new employee? Dave, for instance. If we were going to have the travel agent book his travel, or, I'd have a new staff member. We have somebody new come to visit for a meeting so that it wouldn't be speculated. Why was it necessary to tell the travel agent that Dave, for example, was a new employee? It was important to Sean not to have his identity known. Speculation, defense objects. That's sustained. What, if any, discussions did you have with Sean about communicating with the travel agent? Can you repeat that? Sorry. It's okay. You were asked about reaching out to travel agent. Did you discuss that reach out with Sean? Yes. What did you talk about? I mean, it was by his own direction. So we would discuss when they would arrive and when we would start. You testified earlier about using some drugs at freak-offs. Do you remember that testimony? Yep. And specifically, you talked about using ecstasy at the first freak-off. Is that right? Yes. Did you use drugs at other freak-offs? Yes. How many? All kinds. Let me rephrase that question, Miss Ventura. How many freak-offs did you use drugs at? Oh, all of them. Why did you use drugs at every freak-off? For me, it was disassociative and numbing. I couldn't imagine myself doing any of that without having some sort of buffer or just way to not feel it for what it really was, which was emotionless and S with the stranger that I didn't want to be having S with. Who else besides you used drugs at freak offs? Sean did occasionally, the escort, but I wasn't always clear on that. Were there any freak offs where you did not use drugs? No, not that I remember, no. You talked earlier about using ecstasy at the first freak off. What other drugs, if any, did you use at freak offs? At freak offs, marijuana, ketamine, GHB, sometimes shrooms, just whatever was the drug of choice at that point. Who provided the drugs for freak offs? Sean. When, in relation to the session starting, would Sean provide you with drugs? Before, sometimes an hour before, sometimes before we even got there, somebody would drop drugs off to me where I was. When you say somebody would drop off drugs to you, who dropped off the drugs to you? A staff member, security assistant, whoever was available. When you say staff, whose staff dropped off drugs to you? Sean's staff. And whose security dropped off drugs for you? Sean's security. How did you know how far in advance to take drugs? I would ask. Who would you ask? Sean. Um, More exhibits are pulled up and shown. Questioning continues. Ms. Ventura, do you recognize the document that's marked Government Exhibit B-244? Yes. What generally is this document? It's a text message between me and Sean. Is this a fair and accurate text message between you and Sean? Yes. So government offers exhibits. Defense speaks. May I have a moment? You may. No objection. The exhibits will be admitted. So the exhibits are admitted, and Ms. Gavin is asked to publish the exhibits. Ms. Ventura, focusing first on the left-hand side of the page, who are the participants in this conversation? Sean and I. And focusing on the right-hand side of the page of the screen at the very top, what is the date of the first blue bubble? April 6, 2013. For a few pages, I'm going to read the gray bubbles and you read the blue ones. Can you start with the first blue bubble? About to touch down. Call me as soon as you hit. I'm happy. Call APT. RM in London 5301. Sally Richards. So pausing there, before we go on, what is your understanding of what Sean's text RM in London Sally 5301 Sally Richards means? That's the room number is 5301 and Sally Richards is the name under the room. At what hotel is the room at? It says the London. So continuing, if you can, with the blue bottom at the page, it says K. Bags came out that quick. Okay. Government asked Ms. Gavin can we please turn to page 3 and 4? Government requests Ms. Gavin to turn the page of the exhibits. All set. What Tim do I tell him? What do you think Tim is supposed to say? Time. 3 a.m. Who? Punisher. His dad dies. Punisher will come at 6. Died. Pausing you there. Is this the same Punisher whose photographs we looked at a few moments ago? Yes. So continuing on down, yeah, we forgot about Daniel. He's like having a baby or something. He hit me a little while back. So pausing you there. The reference to the name Daniel, is that the same Daniel we just looked at photographs of? Yes. Continuing on. What do you think Garen just hit me back? We've had him before. White boy named William. So him or Daniel, I'm good with whatever. Checking on Daniel availability. Okay, government speaks. Miss Gavin, can you turn the next 2 pages, please? Can't buy Astro. It's too much. I'm buying crazy stuff. Okay, LOL. I got LOL. LOL, cool. When should I take the thing? Daniel isn't hitting back. Just pause you there to talk about 2 text messages. When you say can't buy Astro, what does Astro refer to? The lubricant, Astro Glide. And the next blue bubble, when you say LOL, cool, when should I take the thing? What does that refer to? The thing refers to the drugs, ecstasy, or MDMA. Continuing on. Okay. Book other through Garrett. Want me to hit Garrett? All set. When shall I take it? Where is it? When will you be there? Pausing you there. What are you talking about taking in the text messages? The drugs? Like, when do I take it? In the text, in the next message from Sean says, it's in med bag. What's the med bag? The med bag is where Sean kept his medicine. It's this Louis Vuitton bag and occasionally kept other drugs in there. When you say other drugs, what other drugs are you referring to? To ecstasy, MDMA, more party drugs. So can you continue reading the blue, please? Yes. Did you book with Garrett? Yes, 3 a.m., the white guy. Did you want to take now and push it to 2:45? In that message, what is your understanding of what Sean is asking you of what you want to take now? The drug and to push up the time of the escort? To push up the time for earlier? Yeah, to push it earlier. Okay, Miss Gavin, please turn the next 2 pages, please. Continuing on, to push to 2:45 or I can. No, that's 45 minutes. You can't. You said you'll be here in 20. I haven't even seen you. Damn. When you say no, that's in 45 minutes. You said you'll be here in 20. I haven't even seen you. Damn. Why did you say that? Because I wanted to see Sean before we started doing anything. Did you want to see Sean before you started taking drugs? Yeah, I wanted to just see him before all of this. So continuing to read. LOL, I'm ready. Did you get orange pill? No. You told me not to take. Can you take it now? It's the orange in the 5-HTP bottle. Okay. I took mine. Okay, getting now. I'm flying. Meet me. Orange or yellow? Pausing you there. When Sean says, I'm flying, meet me, what is your understanding of what I'm flying means? He's high. And when you say orange or yellow, what does Sean respond? Orange. At the bottom of the message, what does Sean say? Have a drink too? Okay, Miss Gavin, can we take that down? Miss Ventura, you didn't take drugs before reaching the location of the freak off. At what point would you take drugs when you reached the location? Immediately after or when I actually got with Sean? And relative to when an escort would arrive, when did you typically take drugs? Before? In addition to taking drugs at the beginning of the freak off, how often did you take drugs during the freak off? All the time. How did you get more drugs? If we ran out, we would call people, friends, or drug dealers, or whatever at that time. Backing up a little, when you said you took drugs all the time throughout the freak offs, approximately how frequently would that be? During a freak off or just, sorry, no problem. How long would the high lap typically last if you took, for example, ecstasy? Like 3 to 4 hours and then would take more because the sessions were quite long. So if you took ecstasy, would you typically need to take more ecstasy every few hours when the high would run out? Yeah. And when that would happen, how would you get more ecstasy to take? We either had it or have it brought to the room. And who had the ecstasy in the room? Sean. And if more drugs needed to be brought to the room, how would you get more drugs? Either he would contact or I would make contact with his contacts to bring more. Who would you contact for additional drugs, if anyone? Drug dealers, friends, assistants, whoever had it at that point? When you say assistants, whose assistants would be contacted? Sean's. When you decided to take more drugs during the freak offs, when the high was wearing off, why did you take more drugs? For me, to remain high and not like be present with the experience. Why did you not want to be present with the experience? Because it was something I hated doing. Circling back on bringing additional drugs, did you contact the individuals you discussed where you were present when anyone dropped off additional drugs? Sometimes, but it was a really brief thing. Who brought additional drugs to freak offs? Again, friends, whoever had the hookup of the drug of the moment. So that could be a drug dealer, it could be a friend, could be an assistant, any one of Sean's, because I didn't have any of those things. You testified earlier that ecstasy is typically a pressed pill. Do you remember that? Yeah. How does ecstasy make you feel? It's a euphoric feeling. I don't really know what it's in it, like the pressed pill. You're more sensitive, you're more aroused, you even just feel more sexual, I would say. You also mentioned that taking MDMA. How does MDMA look like? It's like a crystallized drug, and you can crush it up and turn it into powder and ingest it. How would you take MDMA, put it in the drink usually? How does MDMA make you feel? Very similar to ecstasy, just kind of euphoric. Everything feels light and nice. And yeah, when, if ever, did taking drugs make you feel sick? Often. I used to get sick a lot. My stomach used to not agree well with the ecstasy, especially, but MDMA as well. How often would you get sick from taking MDMA or ecstasy? Almost every time. Like before the actual high hit, I would feel like vomiting. It was usually like a normal feeling. Would you vomit or would you just feel nauseous? I would actually vomit, yeah. Did Sean know about the effects that ecstasy and MDMA had on you? Yeah. How? Because he would see me in the bathroom or I would tell him, so he would just know. What, if anything, would Sean say when you got sick from the MDMA or ecstasy? He didn't say much, but we were in the freak off. He would just he would be encouraging me to get up and continue on with it in that condition. When you say continue on with it, what are you referring to? Continue the freak off, even though I felt like vomiting or that I was. Did you want to continue intercourse felt like vomiting? No. Besides ecstasy and MDMA, what, if any, other drugs were used at freak offs? I said cocaine, marijuana, shrooms. How does ketamine make you feel? Ketamine for me is dissociative, like you could be there, but not mentally be there at all. And how does GHB make you feel? I would say GHB makes you feel kind of drunk, a little bit tipsy. How does cocaine make you feel? Cocaine makes my heart race. I was never a huge fan. You also mentioned mushrooms. How did mushrooms make you feel? They're psychedelic, so you can see things. I feel like the walls come alive. What does that mean, the walls come alive? Everything has life to it when you're taking those kinds of drugs like psychedelics. Have you ever used the phrase the turn up? Yes. What have you used that to refer to? To drugs, to party? And of the drugs we've discussed, what are drugs that you would take to party? Ecstasy and MDMA would be the main ones. And how, if at all, did taking the drugs we just discussed assist in the S around? They always did. Would it be okay to take a quick break? Your Honor, is that okay? Cassie is requesting a quick break. Of course, it's 4 o'clock. Let's come back at 4:10. Thank you. All rise. The direct testimony continues. Miss Ventura, before we broke, we were talking about using drugs at freak offs. Do you remember that testimony? Yes. And you had testified about sometimes contacting people if you ran out of drugs at freak offs. Do you remember that? Yes. When you reached out to a contact for more drugs, how did you know who to reach out to? Sean would tell me who to reach out to exactly. Okay. Earlier, you described the term session, referring to and all of the S acts with the escort. Do you remember that? Yes. Did the sessions follow a similar pattern at most freak offs? Yes. And how did you know what the pattern was? It was established pretty early on in doing the freak offs that Sean enjoyed a lot of conversation or describing, usually started with oil and then it went to S and then eventually turned into, and it was like a gradual process. And is that the same pattern that typically followed in the session? Yeah. Who decided what the pattern was? Sean did. I often would try to speed it up if anyone wasn't really paying attention. Objection. Estevio for the defense objects. Non-responsive. The court says sustained. Can you bring me back? Of course. You were talking about the pattern that was. So let's focus on that for a moment. Okay. What was the first S act of the session? First S act of the session would be um aiding, aiding, look at each other. When you say looking at each other, who were you looking at? I would be looking at the escort and they would be looking at me. I would describe what I saw in detail, and that kind of how the beginning went. Why would you describe what you saw in detail? That was his fantasy. So yeah. Who, if anyone, asked you to describe in detail what you saw? Sean. How did you feel about describing what you were doing in the master step of the session? I mean, it was just always awkward. I'm pretty laid back person, so like sitting there and describing somebody's to another male was just awkward and pretty humiliating. But eventually, it just seemed normal. Did you want to be describing what you were doing? No, I did not. After what was the next step in the session? Was just continuing to put oil on, eventually get to each other. That would eventually lead to OS. I'm going to pause you there. When you move to touch court, how would you know when to move from to? More often than not, I would just ask if it's okay for me to. Who would you ask? Sean? And move from to OS? How would you know when to make the move? I would just do it and hope that it would be accepted timing wise. Or he told. Who would he tell? Sean would tell me. When you say, when you would ask Sean if he could move from to touching, how would you ask him? He was controlling the whole situation. He was directing it. He was doing the lighting, and he was telling us where to be, what to say, how to act in the room. Are you, and you testified that you would sometimes move straight to OS? Yes. Why would you? I would just try to speed up the process. It was personally, if I could get it done, then it's over. And then we moved on to the next day. I just wanted it to be over. When you say you wanted it to be over, what's it? The freak off session. I more the often than not would just want to be able to get to the next, to get to the other room where we could just spend time with each other alone. When you say get to the other room where you could spend time alone, who was in the room where you could spend time alone? Just me and Sean. And after OS, what was typically the next S act? OS would lead to and depending on the familiarity with the escort, sometimes Sean and the escort um have inter me or me be doing something at the same time. Sometimes he would just watch. When you say he would be doing something with you at the same time, what was that something? If I was having, Sean would walk up and give me him OS, and it's just like a lot happening at once. Would Yes. And at what point, usually when it's was okay for them, for Sean. But if they did, they usually, and then sorry, um then we would, Sean and I would go into the next room and he would want me to put the on his body. Who, if anyone, would tell them? Sean was usually right there directing it where it could be. There were occasions when I'd been told to do so. Yes. What happened on those occasions? They got paid less. What, if anything, would Sean say about those escorts been told to do so? He was pretty open with the fact that he wasn't pleased by their performance. So, yeah, he would take less money. And when you would go into the other room and you said, Sean asked you to put, um, mm-hmm, did you do that? I did. Where did you put it? Usually on his chest or on his NIP. Did you want to do that? No. And in total, how long approximately did each of these sessions last? Each session, not like a full freak off. Yeah, each session. Anywhere between like an hour to 3 hours, just depend. And the individual stages that you describe, how long typically did each of these stages last? Felt like forever. One thing could be hours, honestly, depending on how high we were. Yeah. And you testified about wanting to speed the process along. How would Sean react when you tried to speed up the process? He would tell me to slow it down or tell. I would often like if I left the room to use the bathroom, I could hear Sean telling the escort to slow it down, to slow it all down because I usually wanted to just finish. Besides asking you to slow it down, were there occasions where you had to start a stage over if you moved too quickly? Yeah, we would go back to square one. Approximately how many sessions would you have with one escort during a freak off? I would say at least two or three. But a freak off could be 3 to 4 different men. And how was it determined how many sessions would be had with any one escort? It was based off of the high, just how many things were moving. Did you ever want to have additional sessions with them? No. Who, if anyone, would you ask to have, would tell you to have additional sessions? Objection from the defense. Form. I can rephrase, Your Honor. You may. I'm sorry. You may. Ms. Ventura, you just testified you did not want to have additional sessions. I hated it. Did you have additional sessions with an escort? Cuffs? Sometimes yes. Why? Because Sean would want to do more, go longer, finish up stronger, as he would say. You also testified that there were sometimes 3 to 4 escorts at a freak off. Do you recall that? Yes. Were there any occasions where there were more than one escort present for a session? Yes. Approximately how many times was that? That I don't know an exact number, but definitely more than once. Did you want more than that a session? No. It was already enough managing one additional person. And when more than one escort was present, how did the act proceed? Just it was like it was very like prawn. What do you mean by that? It was just like I was an object and being heavily objectified by men in that scenario. You talked about managing additional escorts. What do you mean by managing? Um just having to be the only female in the room, like with the S stuff, the SUL stuff. It just having to entertain one more person, make sure one more person is satisfied. Yeah. During these sessions, where was Sean physically relative to you? If he wasn't involved, he would be like just outside the room, kind of covered up, not seen. You could just hear his voice or in the corner. Um, yeah. If he was involved, though, he would be right next to us. And when you say involved, is that what? Are you referencing he would be part of the S as you discussed earlier? Yeah, with me. If Sean was in the corner of the room, what was he generally doing there? He was generally and just talking. What kind of things did he say? He would just ask me like how the D like what it looked like and how it made me feel. This was so awkward. You also mentioned sometimes Sean would be outside the room. Is that right? Yeah. How frequently did that happen? I mean, it varied. No real number. When you when Sean was outside of the room during the freak offs, what, if any, conversations did you have with Sean before it started about where he would be? We didn't really. I guess on occasion he was like a couple of occasions where he would set up like my phone and his phone on a FaceTime so that like present in the actual room. So I was still expected to do the same thing even though he wasn't there. So on the occasions when Sean was out of the room, what did you and the escort do? Um, if he could see me, if Sean could see me on the FaceTime, I was still doing the same thing. So talking and having this encounter with the escort. But if he was just out of the room and not paying attention, I would stop. How would you know if Sean was out of the room and not paying attention? I would just know that you can't hear him or he didn't call, he's not paying attention. During the freak offs, with what difficulty you have in getting or maintaining um elect it was actually pretty frequent with people that we didn't know well. Yeah, and they would express it like it's every time Sean would talk, it would just throw them off, or if he was moved a candle, or just was distracting, I guess. And what did Sean do when escorts were having trouble with? He would give them a pep talk. I don't. At the end, they definitely didn't get paid the normal amount. I know that. How do you know that? Because he would tell me that he would tell them as well. It wasn't really a secret. When you say he, who is he, Sean? Were there any occasions where Sean offered the yeah, and who else besides escorts? He offered it to me before. And what did he say about you taking the grip? That it was the same effects on women, just sensitivity. Did you take the grip that he offered you? I did. How did you feel? Sensitive, and did you want to take the vitamin? No. I thought, no, I didn't. We're having trouble getting elected. What, if anything, did you observe affected their ability to get elected? Like I said before, just the distraction of seeing Sean move around, maybe just hearing his voice, it's quite recognizable. Any distractions, though, really some of the men would actually just say that like having someone else in the room was just disturbing for them. It made them uncomfortable. Were there any distractions that you observed other than Sean's voice? Your Honor, Miss Estevallo for the defense speaks. Your Honor, I'm going to object at this point. Cumulative in its straining relevance. I'm sorry. The last part I missed it. Relevance. Okay, I'll sustain the objection, and you can maybe rephrase the question. Sure, Your Honor. Okay. Questioning continues. After the end of the session, what would you do and Sean do next? The end of an entire session, or just one session with a freak off? Within a freak off, we would hang out and take more drugs with each other, and after and take more drugs with each other. After a session, would you ever have S with Sean? Yeah. And where would you have S with Sean after the session? In the room outside of where the session was, separate room. You mentioned today that freak offs were video recorded. Do you recall that testimony? Yep. How were they recorded? In the beginning, they were on video cameras, like the ones with the small tape. Then eventually phones, iPads, computers. Those devices were used to record freak offs. His devices on my own, and Sean and my own. Approximately when did freak offs start being recorded? Pretty early on, within the first year. Who, if anyone, proposed recording freak offs? I wouldn't say there was a proposal, it just started happening. How did it start happening? Well, Sean brought out a camera and set it up, and that's what was happening. Did you want to be recorded? No. I remember feeling insane at first, and then he explained to me that it was for him for afterwards. So yeah. Did you ever watch the videos again? Yes. And when would you watch the videos again? Um, I would watch them with Sean afterwards usually when we were having, but I also, if I saw them, I was on my own, I was deleting them. You mentioned that some of the videos were recorded on some of your devices. Do you remember that? Yeah. Why were your devices used? Because they were there. No real reason. Did you want these videos to be on your devices? No. If you saw videos on your devices, what did you do? Delete them? Who set up the recording equipment during freak-offs? Sean, if he wanted me to move it, I would move it. How would you know when he wanted you to move it? He would tell me. Whose idea was it to use your device? It was Sean's idea. Were you always successful? Why did you delete the videos that you found on your device? Humiliating, disgusting. I never wanted anyone to ever see me like that. It just was not okay for me. And I felt like it was just tossed around. Like the idea of it was tossed around like it was nothing. Like the idea of what was tossed around like it was nothing. Objectifying me and putting me in these really compromising, gross positions with strangers that yeah. You also testified that Sean's devices were sometimes used to record freak-offs. Do you remember that? Yeah. And what, if anything, did you ask Sean to do with the videos? I would frequently ask him to delete videos because he had his assistants and staff members have access to his computers and phones. To your knowledge, did Sean delete the videos that were on his devices? I don't know. Were there times where you saw videos even after Sean said he deleted them? Yeah, I would delete them. How often did that happen? On occasion? It wasn't all the time, but enough. Miss Ventura, when, if ever, did you leave a freak off before it was over? When I was literally just trying to go home. What do you mean by that? There was an instance in Los Angeles where it got violent and I chose to leave. Where were you in Los Angeles? I was in Intercontinental Century City. And what happened when you chose to leave? When I chose to leave, I grabbed what I could and got out. And Sean followed me into the hallway before the elevators and grabbed me up and threw me on the ground, kicked me, tried to drag me back to the room. He took my stuff. Yeah. Ms. Ventura, I'm going to start at the beginning of that incident. Okay. Strike that. Government asked for exhibits to be put up. Ms. Ventura, do you recognize the document B-265? Yes. What do you recognize to be? A text message between me and Sean. Is this a true and accurate text message between you and Sean? Yes. The government offers exhibits. The defense speaks. Can I have one moment, please? The court says, you may. Counsel confer. No objection. Okay. Court admits exhibits. Questioning continues. Ms. Ventura, focusing you on the top of the page, if Ms. Gavin, if you can blow that up, who are the participants in this chat? That's me and Sean. Okay. What's the date of this message? March 5th, 2016. And what, if anything, did you have at or around March of 2016? I had my big first movie premiere. And in relation to March 5th, when was that premiere? The premiere was the following Monday or Tuesday. This was a Friday, I believe. Okay. Miss Gavin, if you could put those exhibits down. Directing your attention to Ms. Ventura, directing your attention to the first messages on page 2. Who is this message from? From me. I'm sorry. Oh, 2. On the page on the left. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Yeah, that's from Sean. Okay. What does the message say? Thanks. So what you gonna do so I can plan the rest of my night? And when Sean asked you, so what you gonna do so I can plan the rest of my night? What was your understanding of what Sean was asking? I mean, my understanding after that time passed was that he wanted to have a freak off or do something along those lines. Miss Gavin is asking for pictures to be blown up. How do you respond, Miss Ventura? I say, baby, I want to FO so bad, but I don't want to F myself. What am I to do? What does FO stand for? Freak off. When you say, baby, I want to FO so bad, but I don't want to F myself, what do you mean by that? There's a lot in that little line, but I definitely didn't want to mess my body up for my premiere by partying. But I was telling him that I wanted to have an FO with him. And why did you tell him you wanted to have an FO if you didn't want to mess up your body by partying? Honestly, it was like a bit of damage control ahead. I personally felt like if I sort of initiated or go along with creating this night, that my premiere wouldn't be ruined. I don't know. What were you worried would happen at your premiere if you didn't have a freak off with Sean before the premiere? He would have just made it miserable for me. I never really had like the chance to or the opportunity to enjoy the things that I had worked really hard on. So it just felt like I was just trying to play a balancing act a bit. I think you mentioned damage control. What did you mean by damage control? If I pleased him with the freak off, then my premiere would run smoothly. That's how I looked at it. Miss Gavin, can you pull that down? Miss Ventura, directing your attention to the text messages on the bottom in the green. Miss Ventura, what does this message say? It says, I'm going to go quickly to see Erin before I didn't get to see her, and we can have fun. I don't want you thinking I don't want to. When you say I don't want you thinking I don't want to, what are you referring to? To the freak off. And why did you say that? Because I didn't want him thinking I didn't want to. That would be a problem. Why would that be a problem? Because I knew that he wanted. And, I knew the nuanced conversation. I understood it differently. So turning to the hotel, I believe you testified earlier that this was the Intercontinental in Century City? Yes. Okay. Inside the hotel room, at a high level, can you describe to the jury what happened? Inside the hotel room, we were having a freak off, and it is okay to say who was there. Yes, Jules was one of the escorts, and in the middle of it, there was a lot of drinking. There was a lot of partying, but in the middle of it, I'm not sure what happened, but I got hit by Sean and I had a black eye. And at that point, all I could think about was getting out of there safely. I had my premiere and I didn't want to mess it up, so I left. And at what point in the freak off did Sean hit you? It was like in between sessions, so we weren't in the room with the escort. Was Jules still present in the overall hotel suite? Yes, he was. When Sean hit you? Yes. After that happened, after Sean hit you, what happened next? After he hit me, I saw the result of it. I just knew I had to go get out. So he was distracted. I don't know exactly what he was doing. He was either in the shower or on the phone. I just grabbed my stuff and ran out as fast as I could. And where? Where were you headed when you ran out of the room? I was headed home to my apartment. What happened next? I made it to the elevators. I got my sneakers on, and then the next thing I knew, I was just thrown to the ground. Yeah, it was really fast. Thrown to the ground. You said you got your sneakers on when you got to the elevator. Where were your sneakers before? My sneakers, I think, were in my bag. I just ran out without my shoes. Why did you run out without any shoes? Faster? You said you were thrown down into the elevator lobby? Who threw you down? Sean. He grabbed me by the back of my neck and my hoodie. He just threw me to the ground. And in the interaction in the elevator lobby, what kind of things was Sean saying to you? It's a little bit fuzzy to remember. I don't want you to speculate. So let's pull up some exhibits. Miss Gavin? Miss Gavin pulls exhibits. Miss Ventura, do you recognize this hallway? Yes, that's the Century City Intercontinental Hallway. Okay. Miss Gavin, could you please play 14? Can you please play until 14 seconds? Video plays. Miss Ventura, in which direction are you walking in this video? I'm walking towards the elevator. Sorry, I skipped a step. Who is this? who is in this video? That's me. Okay, Ms. Gavin, can you play until 33 seconds? Video play. Pausing there. Who is depicted on the screen at 33 seconds? That's Sean. And in which direction is Sean heading? Same as me, towards the elevator. What is Sean wearing in his video? Towel and socks. Okay, Ms. Gavin, can you please take this exhibit down? Can you please play until 29 seconds? Actually, pausing there first. Video plays. Ms. Ventura, do you recognize what's depicted here in 10C-1003? Yes, that's the elevator area. Is that at the Intercontinental? That's at the Intercontinental, yeah. Ms. Gavin, can you play until 29 seconds? Video plays. Who is depicted in this frame? It's me. Can you play a few more seconds, Ms. Gavin? Video plays. Pause there. Pause there. Who is behind you now? Sean. Can you play until 56 seconds? Video plays. Pausing there. Ms. Ventura, in which direction is Sean pulling you at the end of that clip? He's pulling me towards the room. And earlier in that clip, did you see what you described earlier of being thrown to the ground? Yes. How many times has Sean thrown you to the ground like that before? Too many to count. I don't know. And when you were thrown to the ground at the Intercontinental, what did you do? I, at that moment, covered my face and just stayed there. Why did you cover your face? Because I didn't want him to do any more damage that he had already done. Why did you just stay on the ground? Because it felt like the safest place to be. Ms. Gavin, can you please take that down? And if you could play 23 seconds to 30 seconds, video plays. Just pausing. I'm sorry before we start. Ms. Ventura, do you recognize what's depicted on the screen in 10C-105? Yes. That's the opposite side of the hallway at the Intercontinental. Okay, Ms. Gavin, can we play to 30 seconds, please? Video plays. And was Sean visible in that clip? Yes. Where was he? He was dragging me around the corner. Ms. Gavin, if you could take that down and please play where we are at 56 seconds. Ms. Gavin, Ms. Ventura, taking it back to your testimony about staying on the ground, were there occasions where you tried to fight back when Sean hit you? No. Ms. Gavin, can you please play 143 to 146? Video plays. Okay, sorry, just one moment. I gave you the wrong timestamp. Please play at 56 seconds to 1 minute and 32. Video plays. Starting from where you are at the corner, pausing you there. Miss Ventura, what are you doing in that corner? I picked up the hotel phone that was on the floor. Okay. And where is Sean? He's standing facing me. And what does he have in his hands? My purse and my overnight bag. Okay, if we can take Miss Gavin, take that down and pull up 10C-104, and we could play at 1 minute 40 to 1 minute 50. Video plays. Which direction is Sean walking? He's walking back towards the room we're staying in. What does he have in his hands? All of my bags. And if you can play to 2 minutes and 8 seconds, video plays. Which direction is Sean walking? Back to the elevator bank. And where are you at this point? I think I'm off. I don't know. I'm off camera, or I'm either on the phone, or I don't know. So I went down the other hallway as well. Are you still in the elevator bank? I think I'm still in the elevator bank. Probably about to get on the phone. What does Sean have in his hands? I don't see anything in his hands. Your bags are no longer in the hands. Is that right? No, it looks like he dropped them. Your Honor, it's 5 o'clock. Should we? The court speaks. Are you at a good stopping place? I'm at a good stopping place. All right. Thank you, members of the juries. I'll give you the same instructions that I gave yesterday. Okay. The jury rises and leaves the courtroom, and Miss Ventura, Cassie Ventura, gets excused. So from here, the court and the attorneys have a discussion about escorting and, who's going to be escorting to and from the building for the witnesses, like Cassie, for example. And they get into this conversation. The court asks, anything further from the government right now? Nothing right now, although I know that the parties intend to submit some letters later this evening. Yes, Your Honor. This is Ms. Comey who speaks for the government, and Ms. Johnson. We want to flag, for your honor, we do plan to put a letter on the seal. The seal exhibits the videos we're planning to put on that in. Can you hear me? I can hear you. We're planning to put that in tonight. Also, we've been doing research on the issues Ms. Shapiro raised about witness contact with counts. We found some law, and we found some examples of judges in this district denying those kinds of applications from the defense. So we're planning to put a letter on that, for your honor as well. Okay, do you have, I mean, if there's going to submit letters on this, is there an objection to the proposal made by the news organizations that 3 poll reporters have access to terms? Yes, your honor. I've been in contact with victims with Jane's counsel, who strongly objects and wants to be heard on this and wants to put in a letter, and I believe victim one's counsel also objects. So right here is, again, this is the first day of Cassie's testimony, May 13th, and media was trying to get a hold of exhibits, okay? Not just of Cassie, but of everybody. Exhibits including, videos. They wanted to watch them. They wanted to get a hold of things, and they wanted to pull a journalist to do that. And there was a lot of objections to this. The core of the objection is that this was blackmail material, and that was used to victimize these women, used to convince them to do more or coerce them to do more of these acts, and showing them to anyone more than absolutely necessary would feed into that victimization, would re-victimize them, and would unnecessarily humiliate them. We have now heard vivid testimony about how humiliating one victim found all of these incidents to be. In our view, and in victims' counsel view, it is absolutely unnecessary and unwarranted to show them to anyone outside of the jury and the parties. The court speaks. And I know that I'll take a look at these exhibits. I know that they will be identified for the court, but in general, I understand that there are images, and then separately, there are videos. The videos pertain to whom? The videos pertain to Miss Ventura and Jane. They are the only 2 victims. That's an important quote. So, the only 2 victims with actual material looks like is a Jane Doe and Cassie. That's based on what the transcript says. So, clock that, okay? To Miss Ventura and to Jane, they are the only 2 victims. Their depictions of court S, they are depictions of S encounters, the ones that are being discussed in this case. Exactly, Your Honor, Ms. Comey responds. They're images of their screenshots of those same videos. Ms. Comey responds, of those same videos. And the reason there are screenshots is our plan was to avoid unduly humiliating these women in public and to have them identify themselves and the escorts in the screenshots, and then minimize the amount that we play while they're on the stand, and instead play whatever excerpts we think the jury needs to see when the witnesses are not. The victims are not themselves on the stand. The court speaks. I take it that the argument on narrow tailoring is that it is exactly what the parties are doing, because the testimony will be heard in open court and the images, the only thing not being shown in open court will be the images and the videos themselves. Those materials from the party's position, or at least the government's position, constitutes re-victimization of these individuals. And so whether it stems from the Crime Victims' Right Act, or from a basic notion of avoiding that kind of a trauma to alleged victims at this point, those are compelling interests that would override any interest in the public of having access to those materials. So if we even spot in the news organizations that there is a compelling interest on the side of the public having access to trial material, those are overwritten by the interest in these. I'm not seeing, since I've had a chance to look through all the cases, I'm not seeing any case that would suggest in any way, shape, or form that images or videos of these types of acts that are alleged to be abuse, SA, would be required to be shown in open court when they pose the obvious risk of re-victimization of the people who are providing this testimony, especially when the individuals are subjecting themselves to testimony about the incidents in open court, and the public will have access to that testimony. Comey speaks. Precisely, Your Honor. And we're not collectively aware of any case. We collectively have extensive experience trying cases that involve SA of adults and minors. We are not aware of a single which a video of an alleged SA has been shown outside of the jury and the parties. The court further speaks. The news organization cite Brown versus Maxwell, but that is a different case. That involves a situation where the entire summary judgment record was sealed, and the Court of Appeals determined that the district court had erred but not doing document by document review of what they needed to be sealed. So the Court of Appeals did it. However, there is a footnote opinion that says that material was redacted, especially when it's related to intimate encounters that the parties expect to remain confidential, and what would seem to apply, among other reasons, to the material that we're talking about here. Ms. Comey speaks. That's exactly right, Your Honor. I'm actually familiar with the material Brown versus Maxwell because many of them were subjects of the criminal case against Maxwell. And my understanding is that it's not a single nude image was released in that. And the process that followed, I believe the judge, Preska, conducted after the circuit reversed Judge Sweet's universal sealing of the summary judgment record. Not a single image of nudity was released for a very good reason. So I don't think that there's any basis in the case law whatsoever for showing any nude images, particularly of alleged abuse, to anyone outside of the jury and the parties. All right, so to complete the record, you're going to put in the letter that you indicated, and also please identify those exhibits that I can review them. Ms. Comey speaks. Yes, Your Honor. Consistent with the rules here, I'm provisionally denying the application raised by the news organizations and including the suggestion that 3 pool reporters be allowed to view and report on the video exhibits. But obviously, if something comes in overnight, I'll take a look at it. If anything changes, I'll let everyone know. Let me pause right here. This right here was something we were waiting for because the news organization, the CBS, the NBC, the ABCs, they had come in and they brought in their own attorney the first day of trial, to basically write a letter and compel. But guys, I mean, the question then becomes, it's one thing for us, as the media, if, bloggers, all these people that are out there, for us to get unsealed documents, or whatever doesn't need to be sealed, for those things to be weighed. But material that is of essay nature or or I don't understand what purpose it serves. I had a lot of people in my comments say, we just need to see, there needs to be transparency there. I'm sorry. There's no transparency there. To me, that's full stop, but that's my opinion. I feel like that there's nothing that it serves, and I completely agree with this ruling. It sounds like they got a provisional denial based on what the judges say. Ms. Comey speaks. Thank you, Your Honor. Court says, was that the only issue? Was that the only issues the parties expected letters to come in? We also plan to put in a letter, I think I mentioned on the defense application, that witnesses not be permitted to communicate with their counsels while at cross-examination. Thank you. We plan to put in a letter on that issue. Just looking ahead, Ms. Estevio, I take it, given that Ms. Johnson has said your cross-examination will go into Thursday, is that basically right? Easily, yes, defense answers. All right. So Ms. Comey or Ms. Johnson, who is your next witness after Ms. Ventura? We're still trying to figure that out, Your Honor. We assured defense counsel we will inform them of that tonight. And part of that is we want to look at the calendar about who would be available in New York if we need to put witnesses on Friday. Okay. Anything else from the defense? Ms. Shapiro speaks. Your Honor, just in regards to the letters Ms. Comey mentioned about the witness communication with her attorney on cross, or other witness communication with their attorneys on cross, we would like to respond to that letter. I realize that cross is going to start tomorrow, and we would appreciate if the court would set a very tight deadline so we have time to respond in writing before the court rules on that. The court responds. I think that was directed at you, Ms. Comey. I'll take as much time as Ms. Shapiro is willing to give me. Ms. Shapiro, for the defense, speaks. We can meet and confer. The court speaks. It's 5:00 right now. You say you've identified some cases. Well, we have, Your Honor. The government speaks. I would like to put them in a format legible and coherent, though. 8 o'clock. All right, Your Honor, thank you. 8 o'clock p.m. Ms. Shapiro responds. If it comes in the morning, I'll read it before we convene. Ms. Shapiro responds, we'll do this as quickly as possible. The court speaks. Let's plan here at 9 a.m. Anything else for the defense? No, Your Honor. From Agnifilo. So they all adjourn. And that is the conclusion of day 2. Okay? Stay tuned for day 3, where Cassie Ventura basically testifies all day. All day. She's on the stand. Guys, let me know what you guys think in the comments. I do apologize. This one took me quite some time to do because, we just had so many other ones that we have to get through. And we're going to work. We'll get through them. Okay. I promise y'all that I will deliver. It takes me a minute. I'm a one-person show. Do me a favor, hit the like button. I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye, guys.